The wind carried the taste of salt and sorrow as she stood on the cliff's edge, parchment trembling in her hands. 7 years of silence had built into this single act, one message written not to a man, but to the memory of him, to the sea that swallowed his name. She wrote of promises unkept, of dreams left adrift, of a love that refused to sink. The ocean below roared as if to answer, each wave a heartbeat of something ancient and alive. With trembling resolve, she sealed the letter, slipped it into the green glass bottle, and kissed the rim. A final goodbye to what once was. When the bottle left her hands, it caught the sun's dying light and vanished into the endless blue. For the first time, her tears did not fall in grief, but in release. The sea had taken him once. Now she was giving herself to its mercy again. Morning arrives veiled in mist, and the sea murmurs like something half awake. Alara stands on the shore where her message vanished, listening to the rhythmic pull of waves as though the ocean were whispering her words back to her. The world feels suspended. A quiet after confession. She walks barefoot through the foam, her footprints dissolving seconds after they're made. Fragile as memory. The gulls cry above her, their voices sharp and lonely. She imagines her bottle drifting in the vastness, caught in unseen currents, perhaps already shattered or perhaps still floating towards something beyond her understanding. The tide rushes forward and kisses her ankles colder than she expects. For a moment, she thinks she hears his voice, faint, distant, like a breath trapped between waves. But when she turns, only the empty horizon looks back. The lighthouse looms against a darkening sky, its beam cutting through drizzle like an old guardian's eye. Inside, Mara tends to the light with quiet precision, her movements steady and sure. When Alara enters, dripping with sea spray and silence, Mara doesn't ask what happened. She simply pours tea and listens to the rain. They speak little. Words feel too heavy. Instead, the crackle of the kettle and the hum of the sea below fill the space between them. Mara's gaze lingers on Alara's face, the faint hope softening her grief, the fragile peace after surrender. Outside, thunder murmurs far away, as if promising the return of storms. Alara looks toward the horizon through the lighthouse window, her reflection merging with the sea beyond. "It's gone," she whispers. Mara nods, eyes steady. Then it's finally begun. By evening, the wind returns, restless, insistent. Alara's son runs along the hallway of their seaside cottage, laughter echoing against the rumble of the gathering storm. She watches him from the window, the sea behind him dark and alive. He knows nothing of the letter she sent, nor the man whose name he carries. When lightning cracks across the horizon, he presses close to her side, eyes wide with wonder, not fear. She tells him stories, not of loss, but of adventure. Of a sailor who followed the stars home. As thunder rolls, she holds him tighter, breathing in the scent of his hair. The promise of life that continued despite all that was taken. Outside, the ocean roars, louder, as if reminding her that every peace is temporary, that the sea never forgets what it keeps. Far beyond the horizon, the bottle drifts, small against the immensity of the open sea. Days turn to weeks, the sun beating down, storms rising and breaking, currents shifting endlessly. It passes through schools of silver fish, past coral shadows and drifting kelp forests. The letter inside remains dry, its ink preserved by fate or faith. Somewhere across those same waters, a ship cuts through fog, its captain glancing toward the bottle without seeing it. Nature guards the secret, the fragile thread connecting what was lost to what waits to be found. And as night falls once more, the bottle glows faintly beneath the moon. A quiet heartbeat traveling through time and tide, carrying love across the unreachable. The storm came without warning. By dawn, the beach was littered with debris. Splintered wood, tangled nets, broken shells, glistening like tears beneath the gray sky. Elara stood amid the wreckage, her hair plastered to her face by rain, her breath visible in the cold. She wasn't searching for anything. Not really. But her eyes combed the shoreline as if guided by instinct. A flash of glass caught her attention near the rocks, half buried in seaweed. Her heart faltered. It was a bottle. Green glass, sealed tight. The same kind she had thrown into the sea 7 years ago. For a long moment she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The sea hissed against the stones as if watching. When she finally reached for it, her hands trembled. Inside, a folded letter waited, and the handwriting was unmistakable. It was his. She carried the bottle home like a relic, wrapped in cloth, as though it might shatter from the weight of memory. The letter within was dry, impossibly preserved. When she broke the seal, the scent of the sea rose like a ghost, sharp and briny. The handwriting was his, steady and deliberate. Elara, if the sea returns this to you, know that I am still somewhere between its depths and your shore. She read it again and again, each word a knife and a caress. It was dated 1 year after he had vanished. Her tears fell freely now, but not from grief, from the unbearable proof that love had outlived time. The walls seemed to pulse with the sound of waves, the air charged with something unexplainable. The bottle that once carried her goodbye had come home, bearing a reply. By dusk, she found her way to the harbor. Captain Dorian Hale was there, the man who had once sailed beside her husband and returned alone. His weathered face paled when he saw the letter in her hands. The sea wind tugged at his coat, carrying the scent of salt and rusted anchors. "It can't be," he murmured, voice rough from years of guilt. But the seal, the ink, the date, all were real. He confessed then, his voice breaking, that Adrian had survived the storm for days, signaling from a lifeboat before disappearing into fog. No one had believed him. The silence that followed was thick with the weight of what might have been. Elara stared at the horizon beyond the masts, her heart split between fury and hope. Somewhere, the sea whispered again, not of endings, but of unfinished stories. That night, Mara arrived at the cottage, drawn by Elara's urgent call. They spread maps across the table, tracing possible drift routes, the currents that might have carried both bottle and man. The candlelight flickered over their faces, shadows dancing like restless spirits. Every arrow, every circle on the charts became a fragment of hope. If he wrote this, he was alive a year after, Mara said, her tone steady but eyes alight. Elara nodded, hands tightening around the edges of the parchment. The sea outside was calm now, deceptively so, as if waiting. The truth was no longer buried. It was beckoning from the horizon. For the first time in 7 years, Elara felt her heart beat not for what she had lost, but for what might still be found. Elara returned to the cliff where she had first released the bottle. The night was still. The stars scattered like salt across the sky. She could hear the ocean breathe. Steady, alive, eternal. The wind brushed her face, carrying whispers that seemed to form her name. For a fleeting second she felt him near, as if his presence rose from the deep to meet her. The bottle's letter lay open in her hand, the ink now smudged by tears and sea mist. "If you're out there," she whispered, "I'm coming." Below, the tide rolled in slow and deliberate, like an answer forming in the dark. Somewhere far beyond her sight, the same current that had once stolen her love now stirred again, ready to bring the truth home. Days turned to weeks as Elara and Captain Dorian traced the drift maps that once carried her message. Then, on an old maritime chart, a faint outline appeared. An island with no name, erased from modern records. Dorian's weathered hands trembled slightly as he whispered, "That's where the currents converge. If your bottle made it there, The air around them seemed to thicken, heavy with meaning. Elara stared at the faded ink, heart pounding in her chest. The ocean had hidden something there, something that refused to stay buried. They prepared to set sail at dawn, though every instinct told her that some things are better left unfound. Yet love is its own compass, and hers now pointed toward the edge of the known world. A week into their voyage, the sea turned glassy, too calm, too still. The crew whispered of bad omens, but Dorian pressed on. Then came the diver's shout. Something glimmered below, half buried in the coral shell. Elara leaned over the railing, heart hammering as they hauled it up. A rusted metal case, sealed but intact. Inside lay fragments of a journal, salt-eaten but legible. The first page bore her husband's handwriting, the words smeared but undeniable. "If this reaches anyone, tell Elara the sea kept me alive." The world tilted around her, and for a breathless moment, she forgot how to breathe. The sea, once her grief, had become her messenger, and its message was impossible. That night, sleep escaped her. From her cabin window, Elara watched the dark sea roll endlessly under the stars. The waves whispered secrets, or maybe just the echoes of her own heart. Then she saw it. A faint glow moving beneath the surface, weaving like a pulse of light. It wasn't the reflection of the moon. It moved with purpose, circling the ship once, then vanishing into the deep. Her breath caught. Was it a trick of exhaustion, or something watching her from below? The ocean no longer felt vast. It felt sentient, aware. Somewhere down there, her husband's words had survived the impossible. Maybe he had too. She pressed her palm to the glass and whispered into the dark, "Show me where you are." At dawn, Mara's voice crackled through the ship's radio, faint but steady. She had found something, a shell that had washed ashore near the lighthouse. "You need to hear this," she said. Through the static came a strange sound, like breath moving through water, followed by a man's voice, faint, broken, but real. Elara's knees gave out as she clutched the receiver. "Elara, if you hear this, follow the tides." Her pulse roared in her ears. The connection faded, replaced by the ocean's hollow hum. Dorian stared at her, jaw tight, disbelief etched deep in his weathered face. "That voice," she whispered. "I would know it anywhere." For the first time, the distance between life and death felt only a tide apart. When the storm hit that night, the journal nearly washed away. Elara clung to it as the deck tilted under waves taller than houses. Later, soaked and shivering, she opened it again in the flickering lantern light. Each page told of survival, makeshift shelters, fishing on unknown shores, the hope of rescue that never came. But the last entry chilled her blood. The sea isn't what we think it is. It remembers. It keeps. A drop of water fell onto the ink, and she couldn't tell if it came from the ceiling or her own tears. The wind howled around her, rattling the walls, and somewhere deep below the ship, something groaned, as if answering from the depths. The sea had spoken once. Now, it was calling her by name. The morning after the storm, Elara found a compass lodged between the deck planks, rusted, old, and engraved with initials she knew by heart. AV. It had been Adrian's, lost with him in the wreck. The needle spun wildly before steadying, pointing east, toward nothing but endless horizon. Dorian swore it was impossible. The device hadn't worked in years. Yet, the air seemed to hum around it, as if the ocean itself bent to its direction. Elara's breath trembled. She felt the world tilt, reason slipping beneath the tide of faith. "East," she whispered. Dorian hesitated, then nodded grimly. Then east it is. The ship turned toward the sunrise, into waters no map dared name, following a dead man's compass and a living woman's hope. Days bled together under a sky that refused to clear. The sea was calm, almost unnaturally so, its surface mirroring the clouds in ghostly perfection. Elara began to dream of Adrian standing at the ship's bow, calling her now in the voice the sea had stolen. Each night she woke to the same rhythm, waves lapping, wood creaking, a whisper carried through the wind. Dorian watched her quietly, his hands steady on the wheel, his silence carrying the weight of things unseen. "He's close," she said one morning, her voice barely a breath. Dorian didn't answer, but his eyes flicked to the horizon where a faint line of land shimmered like a mirage. Somewhere ahead, memory was becoming real. When the fog lifted, they saw it. The shattered remains of a vessel sleeping beneath the waves, its mast a skeleton piercing the surface. The name etched on the stern was still legible, the Ecliptic. Adrian's ship. Elara's knees nearly gave way. Divers descended, vanishing into the blue abyss, and when they returned, one carried a pendant. Her husband's. A small silver compass rose worn smooth by time. "He was here," Dorian murmured, but Elara's gaze stayed fixed on the depths, where shadows moved between the wreck's beams. Something shimmered, not fish, not debris, something human? A hand? A reflection? Her pulse stuttered. For the first time, she wasn't sure whether she wanted the truth to rise from below or remain lost forever. That night, the sea began to glow. Waves shimmered with bioluminescent light, wrapping the ship in a halo of blue fire. Elara leaned over the edge, drawn to the light, her reflection fractured by rippling water. Then she saw him, not a memory, not a dream, but a figure beneath the surface, eyes open, lips moving as if whispering through water. She reached out, her fingertips grazing the waves, but the image dissolved into foam. Dorian grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "It's the sea playing tricks," he warned. But she knew better. The sea wasn't playing. It was showing her the way. The current shifted eastward again, and the compass needle trembled violently in her pocket, spinning toward fate. By dawn, the glow had faded, but the air hummed with something unseen. Elara stood at the bow, whispering his name into the wind again and again until her voice broke. Then, faintly, from the sea's hollow vastness, the echo came back, distorted but real, carried on the mist. "Elara." Dorian turned sharply, eyes wide, but there was no one else on deck. The compass stilled, its needle no longer trembling. She closed her eyes, tears mixing with salt air. "I hear you," she whispered. The world felt thinner now, the boundary between love and death drawn only in water. Behind her, the first light of dawn crept over the sea, painting everything in gold, even grief. The fog lifted at dawn, unveiling a silhouette on the horizon, an island unlike any other. Its shores shimmered like broken mirrors, fragments of crystal sand reflecting the sky. The compass needle spun once, then stilled, pointing straight ahead. As they approached, the sea grew eerily calm, waves parting as if guiding them to shore. Dorian whispered a prayer, his voice small against the vast silence. Elara stepped off the boat, her boots sinking into the glassy sand that sang faintly beneath her weight. The air smelled of salt and memory. Every instinct screamed that this was the place. The end of one story, the beginning of another. Somewhere beyond the dunes, the ocean's whisper grew louder, forming a single word in the wind. Home. They found the hut at twilight, built from driftwood and coral, its walls bleached white by the sun. Inside, time had been frozen. A rusted compass on a table, a journal beside it, a piece of cloth Elara herself had sewn years ago. Her hand trembled as she touched it. Dorian stayed outside, giving her silence. Then she heard it. Faint footsteps behind her. She turned, and in the doorway stood a man, weathered by sun and solitude, his eyes impossibly familiar. He said her name as if he'd been saying it every day for years. Elara couldn't breathe. The world seemed to fold into a single heartbeat. Adrian. He was alive, or something close to it. He told her everything. How the storm had taken his ship, how he'd survived on this island, living off rain and memory. But his voice carried something else too. The knowledge that the sea had not simply spared him, but kept him. "It wouldn't let me leave," he said softly. "Not until you called me back." Tears streamed down her face as she touched his hand. His skin was warm but faintly cool beneath, like stone that remembers the sea. Outside, the waves began to rise again, their rhythm deep and deliberate. The bottle, her bottle, lay on the table between them, its glass glowing faintly. The message that had gone out in sorrow had returned in love, and now the sea had come to collect its answer. That night, the ocean roared like it remembered everything. Waves rose high against the shore, the island trembling with each crash. Adrian stood barefoot at the water's edge, the bottle in his hands. "It's calling," he said, eyes distant. "It's time." Elara ran to him, the wind tearing at her hair, the sea's spray mingling with her tears. "No," she cried, clutching his arm. "You came back to me." He smiled faintly. "I never left. I just learned to listen." The tide surged around them, glowing with ghostly light, wrapping his legs, his waist, his chest. "When the sea gives, it takes in kind," he whispered, placing the bottle in her hands. And then the waves rose, swallowing his silhouette into the deep. When morning came, the island was still again, as if nothing had ever stirred its glassy shore. The tide had retreated, leaving behind the bottle beside Elara's sleeping form. Inside, her letter remained, but now below her words were new lines written in his hand. "The sea gave me back to you, but it cannot keep. Let me rest where I belong, within its heart, not away from it." She pressed the glass to her chest, the ocean's quiet rhythm matching her heartbeat. Dorian found her there, silent, the waves lapping gently nearby. She didn't cry. The sea had taken its due, but it had also returned something greater. Faith that love does not drown. It simply changes form, waiting to be found again when the tide turns. Weeks later, the harbor slept under a sky of quiet gray. The sea, once wild and roaring, now breathed softly against the docks as though weary from keeping so many secrets. Elara stepped off the boat, her boots landing on familiar wood that creaked like an old memory. In her arms she carried the bottle, no longer a vessel of hope, but of closure. Captain Dorian followed behind her, his eyes lowered, his silence heavy with all the words neither could bear to speak. The village hadn't changed. Gulls still circled, ropes still swayed, and the lighthouse still turned its slow, eternal eye toward the deep. Yet everything felt different. The ocean no longer seemed her enemy, nor her god, just a keeper of truth. She whispered a thank you to the tide that had both taken and returned her world. That night, when the tide rose high against the cliffs, Elara felt it again, that tremor in the air, that whisper through the wind. She walked alone to the shore, guided by something deeper than reason. The sea lay silver under the moon, calm yet breathing, alive. And then she saw it, a figure emerging from the surf, slow, steady, human. Her heart stopped. The waves lapped around his knees, his face pale against the darkness, eyes impossibly blue. Adrian. She didn't run. She simply stood there, breath caught in disbelief, until he reached her. His hand, when it touched hers, was cold but real. The world narrowed to that single moment. The sea behind them, the stars above, and love defying every law the living knew. The morning after, sunlight spilled through the cottage windows, soft and golden. Liam sat by the table, tracing the patterns in a seashell his mother had brought home. When the door creaked open, he looked up and saw a man standing there, framed by light and shadow. Alara's voice trembled as she spoke his name. "Liam, this is your father." For a moment, the child only stared, his young face a mirror of both disbelief and wonder. Then slowly he smiled, the kind of smile that breaks the heart and mends it at once. Adrian knelt, his hands shaking as he touched his son's cheek, tears glinting in his eyes. The sea had taken years from them, but in that instant, it gave something back that time could never steal. Peace never comes without questions. In the nights that followed, Alara lay awake beside Adrian, listening to his breath, steady but not the same. Sometimes his eyes would drift, as if seeing another world beneath the surface. He spoke of the sea's voice, how it called to him even now. "It let me return," he whispered once, "but it still remembers I belong to it." The air between them felt fragile, like glass. She wanted to keep him anchored, to bind him to this world with love alone, but the ocean's pull was strong. Outside, the tide rose higher each night, whispering against the rocks, a reminder that every miracle carries its cost. One night, the bottle glowed again. It sat on the windowsill, moonlight pooling through its green glass, as if awakened by some unseen tide. Alara woke to find Adrian standing before it, his hand hovering just above its surface. "It's calling me back," he said softly. She rose and took his hand, shaking her head, tears welling. "No more goodbyes," she whispered, but the bottle pulsed once, faintly, like a heartbeat, and then still. Adrian turned to her, his smile faint, sad, infinite. "Then I'll stay until the tide turns again." She pressed her forehead to his, the world falling silent around them. Outside, the sea exhaled, calm for now. Inside, the bottle waited, still, patient, holding the space between love and eternity. The bottle sat untouched for days, a silent sentinel by the window. Then, one dawn, Alara found a new page within, written in her own hand, though she had never written it. The words spoke of farewell, but also of peace. "If love can cross the sea, it can cross the veil." Her fingers trembled as she read, realizing that some part of her had been writing through the tides all along. Adrian stood beside her, watching the horizon as the first light spilled over the water. "The sea isn't cruel," he murmured. "It just keeps what it must." She turned to him, tears in her eyes. "And what about what it returns?" He smiled faintly, tracing her cheek. "That part's yours to keep." The sea turned strange that evening, glassy and still, as though the world held its breath. Alara felt it before she saw it, the quiet pull, the hush in the air, the moment between tides. Adrian's hand tightened around hers. "It's time," he said, voice barely a whisper. The horizon shimmered, light bending as if a doorway opened beneath the water. "Will I lose you again?" she asked, her voice breaking. He shook his head slowly. "Not lose. Just remember differently." The wind brushed their faces, soft as a sigh. When she blinked, he was stepping into the waves, the light around him turning white, then blue, then gone. The sea's surface rippled once and was still. That night, a storm swept through the coast, sudden, fierce, cleansing. Mara tended the lighthouse, flames steady within the great glass chamber as wind screamed through the cliffs. Alara arrived drenched, the bottle clutched to her chest, and without a word, placed it on the ledge beside the lantern. "He gone," she said simply. Mara touched her shoulder, steadying her trembling form. "No," she whispered. "He's home." The lightning flashed over the sea, illuminating the waves below. For an instant, a figure seemed to stand there watching the light. When the storm passed, the lamp's glow softened, and the bottle was empty, save for a single grain of crystal sand. Months passed. The sea returned to gentleness and life to rhythm. Liam grew, learning the tides and the stars from his mother's stories. Sometimes he'd ask about the man in the pictures, and Alara would smile, pointing to the horizon. "He is there," she'd say, "in every wave that touches shore." The bottle remained on the mantel, now clear and empty, its glass faintly tinted with sunlight. One evening, she and Liam walked the beach, their footprints weaving together through the sand. When the tide came in, it erased them both, not as loss, but as belonging. The ocean didn't take any more. It carried. And in the quiet, she could almost hear Adrian's laughter in the wind. Years later, the bottle still sat by her window, its glass dulled with time. The sea beyond was calm, as though it too had grown old and weary. Alara often sat there in the evenings, her hair streaked with silver now, her eyes still the color of storms. Sometimes she'd speak softly to the horizon, as if continuing an endless conversation. One twilight, as she drifted between thought and dream, a wave touched the shore with a sound like breathing. The bottle shimmered once more, catching the last light of the dying sun, then dimmed forever. The tide whispered against the stones, not in longing but in lullaby. The ocean slept, and so did her heart, not in sorrow but in peace.